Angelo Ruggiero's grandparents immigrated to New York during the first part of the 20th century, their roots being in the southern section of mainland Italy known as Calabria. According to neighbors, Ruggiero's parents were fair-minded and hard-working, hoping their sons would follow in their footsteps and become upstanding American citizens. But it wasn't meant to be. There was a family member, which some reports identify him as an uncle and others as a cousin, who appears to have had more influence over the Ruggiero brothers than their father. That relative was Agnello della Croce, also known as Mr. Neal. Angelo, who had the nicknames Fat Ange or Quack Quack due to his talkative nature, was born in the Bronx on July 29, 1940. He was a lifelong friend of John Gotti, who later became the boss of the Gambino crime family after the assassination of Big Paul Castellano. Ruggiero struggled with school, considering it an utter waste of time. He eventually dropped out and began committing petty crimes with Gotti. Jerry Capisi writes, "Teens at Franklin K. Lane High School had many competing street gangs to choose from. John Gotti joined the Fulton Rockaway Boys. Another member was Angelo Ruggiero, a pudgy-faced, pigeon-toed kid." By the late 1950s, Angelo had racked up numerous arrests for disorderly conduct, public intoxication, auto theft, bookmaking, possession of an illegal firearm, and burglary. In the preceding decade, Ruggiero shadowed his best friend John Gotti as they both became associates and began to move up in the Gambino crime family. As their status grew, so did their criminal activity. The duo graduated from petty crimes of their early years into truck hijacking. But Angelo's big break came in 1973 when Gotti was personally asked by Don Carlo to murder Irish mobster James McBratney. McBratney had allegedly been involved in the kidnapping and murder of Don Carlo's nephew, and he wanted revenge. Ruggiero, along with Gotti and Ralph Gallioni, showed up at Snoopy's Bar and Grill on Staten Island, May 22, 1972, a McBratney hangout. After a brief scuffle, McBratney received 3 shots to the head at close range. An eyewitness who had slipped out of the bar to call police was able to point authorities to the trio. In one of the most incredible plea deals of the century, Ruggiero and Gotti copped to manslaughter and received a 4-year sentence. In July 1977, both men were released on parole. A condition of the release was steady employment. As a reward for doing his piece of work on McBratney and serving his time well, Ruggiero was given a no-show job as a salesman for Arc Plumbing and Heating, a company owned by Gambino associates Anthony and Cesar Guarino. But the family wasn't finished showing their appreciation. The boss, Carlo Gambino, had passed away while they were doing time, and now the books were being opened. Soon after their release, Ruggiero and Gotti became made members of the Gambino family in a secret ceremony headed by recently promoted boss Paul Castellano, underboss Neal Della Croce, and the family consigliere Joseph N. Gallo. As made men, their fortunes grew. It was apparent to all that Gotti was the leader, and Ruggiero was always right behind him. To say it another way, wherever Gotti went, Angelo Ruggiero was soon to follow. On March 18, 1980, Gotti's son Frank was riding his mini-bike, darting out from behind parked cars in front of the Gotti home. As neighbor John Favara was coming down the street, his car hit the young Gotti, killing him. Police ruled it an accident, and no charges were ever filed against Favara. However, the Gottis couldn't let it go, and though no body has ever turned up or any evidence to prove he was killed in retaliation, John Favara hasn't been seen since July 28, 1980. And though no one knows for sure, it is widely believed that Angelo Ruggiero played a part in his demise. Though Ruggiero shared blood with Della Croce, according to most accounts, Mr. Neal was closer to John Gotti, but there was still a love and respect between Ruggiero and Della Croce. This love was tested when a Ruggiero associate by the name of Peter Tombone was arrested for drug dealing. Since the days of Gambino, There was a deal drugs and die policy, and Mr. Neal was a vocal supporter of the edict. By all accounts, not only Tomboni, but Ruggiero should have been whacked for this violation. But interestingly enough, it never happened. Sammy Gravano, one-time underboss for the Gambinos, wrote years later, "I don't think if he lived, he would have let Angelo get murdered. He would have probably put him on a shelf somewhere and appeased Paul that way. If he let Paul kill him, there would have been a war. I think he felt, Paul's the boss, so let's fess up. This is the truth. This is what happened." Then, if Paul followed up and said, "Well, I want him dead," Neal would have fought tooth and nail to save him. And if he couldn't, who knows what the would have happened? Who knows is the right question. But it was a moot point, because on December 2nd, 1985, Neal Della Croce died. It was reported that Ruggiero was a constant visitor at his bedside and would stay there for hours, talking with him. With the passing of Mr. Neal, the animosity between Castellano and the Gotti crew came to a head. Though he didn't know it, Big Paul's days were numbered. And Angelo Ruggiero, he would be a player in one of the biggest mob rubouts in the latter half of the 20th century. Just 2 weeks after the death of Della Croce, Big Paul and his newly appointed underboss Tommy Bellotti were gunned down in front of Sparks Steakhouse. Gotti became the boss of the Gambino family, and Ruggiero was promoted to capo. But if you had asked around, friends and enemies, many believed Ruggiero was in over his head. According to Jerry Capisi and Gene Mustin, Angelo Ruggiero had come down a long dirty road with Gotti, a road with many bodies alongside it. Angelo relished his triumphant moment and felt partly responsible. "Meet your new boss," Angelo beamed to crew members as he and John walked into the Bergen. Ruggiero was never a deep thinker. Most considered him a good attack dog, but he never had the mental power or stability to run a crew. According to Selwyn Robb, Gotti once commented that Ruggiero wasn't bright enough to be the family consigliere. And though no documentation is offered, Wikipedia states, given John Gotti's new position of Gambino crime family boss in 1985, Gotti no longer handled the actual specifics of contract killings and assigned the job to Ruggiero. But Ruggiero, who often let his emotions and mouth run away with him, would occasionally demonstrate a less than firm grasp of the arcane art of contract murder. On a recorded conversation, he once threatened to throw 2 former drug traffickers looking for payment in the pool of his Cedarhurst home, where he told them he kept man-eating sharks. But Ruggiero did help plan the murder of another Gambino capo, Robert D. Bernardo. The circumstances as to why DB was whacked are cloudy and varied. Many experts believe that Gravano's account, given years later, was self-serving and unreliable. In 1986, Anthony Gaspipe Casso, a soldier in the Lucchese family, openly referred to Ruggiero as an idiot. Ruggiero was angry, and he took it upon himself to have Casso whacked. And though Casso was shot 5 times, he somehow managed to survive. And this created all sorts of problems for John Gotti. As a result, he began questioning Ruggiero's ability as a capo. Not long after the attempted shooting of Anthony Casso, Gotti shelved his old friend, which is another way of saying he was out of the family. Was this move the result of the unsanctioned hit on Casso, or because Ruggiero was caught on tape disclosing family secrets, unable to keep his mouth shut, gossiping about everything? But the walls continued to close in on Angelo Ruggiero. The 1985 drug case and the taped conversations by the feds were now coming to a head. Due to jury tampering, the first 2 court cases ended in mistrial. In 1989, Ruggiero was released on bail pending a 3rd trial. But by this time, he was in the final stages of lung cancer brought on by years of chain smoking. Gravano claimed that Gotti wanted his old friend whacked, but according to Sammy, he convinced him otherwise, stating that he was too sick and he would surely die by year's end. On December 5th of that same year, just 11 days before the 4-year anniversary of Big Paul's assassination, Angelo Ruggiero died of lung cancer in Howard Beach, Queens at the age of 49. Again, according to Gravano, He claimed that Gotti didn't even want to go to the funeral, stating that he had to drag him to the event.